Hi everyone. Today we're going to try something new. We're going to try where I am going to record myself giving a bit of a lecture, and you guys get to just watch this in the comfiness of your home. So happy snow day to all of you. And I am going to let you all just print up at home the chapter 22 notes from Schoology under chapter 22, what is this? Week 19? Yeah, week 19. And I have this file up there where it gives kind of a brief overview of some of the slides that I'm going to be covering for the day. And basically you can print up these papers, and from this you can basically print this up and I will talk through the lecture just like you were in class, but you guys can be in your pajamas and sit back with your hot chocolate and just listen to little old me give some talks and some brief overview through these slides while you take some notes. For this week, I will request that you guys stick, instead of doing any Cornell notes, stick to the worksheets. And we're starting Unit 7, and we are on to plants. We will not be doing any more protists, fungi, and bacteria. We're getting more and more complex on the tree of life. So we have now made it to plants. Woohoo! So just in the ease with this snow day and how it's kind of made things a little bit befuddled, I'm going to ask that you keep with the worksheets. That's going to help you in the next 2 weeks as you're working on your own. And next week already, since we're only spending 2 weeks, it's just going to help me when I form the test, that I will just draw the questions then from the worksheets so that we're all on the same page, even though you're at home and I'm not getting a chance to really touch base with you in class. Maybe I can touch base with you on Skype, or you guys can touch base with me on email and always on my phone. But just then I will have that same base to kind of put us all on the same page of where to draw those questions from. Always from the vocabulary, always from the key points, and always then from the worksheets will I draw from the test then, so you know where to study from exactly. Also, that's where a lot of these lecture points are coming from those main points in your textbook, from the vocabulary and also from those key points. So that's what we're going to go through. So that first slide that we're going to go, without further ado, actually this week you're going to be working through those sections in your workbook. You do have a bird that you're going to be studying about, and I believe it's let me check, it is the dark-eyed junco video. And then I do have a video on Thursday. It's Life Plants. It's a BBC video, and there is a worksheet to follow with that. So you will be doing that. Then next week you will have a bit of a lab to do, as well as the worksheets. So I will check if there are some plants that you need to look for, which make it a little bit more of a challenge when there's snow covering everything. So hopefully the snow will decrease and you can look for some plant stems and leaves in all of this fun snow. Anyways, we'll carry on. So get out a pen. You can even pause this, and you can even stop me as you will, that you couldn't do in class. So isn't that awesome? So here we go. We're going on to what are plants. So what are plants? Plants are multicellular eukaryotes, and of course, as you've learned, they are made up with cell walls, which is nice that you've learned, and those cell walls are made of cellulose. So plants also develop from multicellular embryos. And of course, they carry out photosynthesis, and they have pigments that are made up of chlorophyll A, and then behind my screen right here, chlorophyll B as well. Those are the main points of plants. If you need to, you can pause the screen before you move on to the next one. Plant life cycle, we're going to go more in depth into this, but just to give you an idea, there is not just a basic life cycle, there's an alternation of generation, it's what it's called, because there's two stages basically in a plant life. There's the haploid and there's the diploid. The haploid is called the sporophyte phase, and then there's the diploid is the sporophyte phase, and that's over here in the purple phase. And then you have the gametophyte phase. That's the haploid phase. That's the end phase. So we're going to talk a little bit more of that. But because there's the two phases, they call it the alternation of generation. Alternation of generation, because you're alternating between haploid and diploid phases. So the plant life cycle, that's on the fourth slide right here. Boop, boop, wait, where? Boop. Here we go, right there. You're going to be filling in a couple places. So during the two phases of the life cycle, mitosis and meiosis alternate to produce two types of reproductive cells, gametes and spores. So that first one, the sporophyte, that's the diploid 2N phase. And they're the spore producing plant. So that's what you're filling in here, right here, the diploid 2N phase. That's what the sporophyte is, or it's known as the spore producing plant. Now the haploid N phase is called the gametophyte. And that's known as the gametophyte, the gamete producing plant. And then what's nice is to write this down, you can just pause me. So what do plants need to survive? Well, you've kind of learned this in your past biology books and lessons throughout the years. It's very simple. They always need sunlight, they need water, and they need minerals. They need a gas exchange, and we're going to go more into depth into that next week, as you're going to see. But of course, with the whole exchange that we learned in photosynthesis, they need to exchange carbon dioxide for oxygen. And then you'll see that there's a transport of water and nutrients throughout the plant body. And we're going to learn the tissues that do that. And then next week, you're going to go even more into depth into those tissues. So the overview of the plant kingdom, we've got these 4 groups based on these features that we're going to look at. There's the water conducting tissues that we're going to look at. There's seeds, there's flowers, and then plants are also classified by the reproductive structures and then the body plan as well of plants. So the first plants that we're going to look at are the bryophytes, and those are our mosses and ferns, and we're really, we see those all over in our neck of the woods. They're probably in your front yards, backyards as well. So they need a lot of moisture and shade and water to survive, and you're going to see why. So mosses right here and their relatives are called bryophytes, and they're non-vascular plants. So in order to be non-vascular, it means they don't have vascular tissues or vessels in their tissues. And they don't have specialized tissues. Vascular tissues are specialized tissues that conduct water and nutrients. So these are the 3 groups, or these are the characteristics of bryophytes. So they are adapted to life in wet habitats and nutrients poor soils. They can tolerate low temperatures and are clumps of gametophytes growing together. And their life cycles really depend on water for reproduction. And then they draw up water by osmosis, only a few centimeters above the ground. They really are limited with how high up they get. And I think that I'm going to go into that a little bit more in depth in just a slide or two. They really are limited because they don't have vascular tissue. They are limited how tall they are. So you'll notice that these mosses really are short and low to the ground. So there's three types of bryophytes, and you're going to see that in the next slide that you're going to write these down. Three types. And I put just on the last line, this is a key concept in your book. Three types of bryophytes, the mosses being the most common. So the first one is mosses, the next one is liverworts, and the last one is hornworts. It sounds like something you'd see at Hogwarts. So mosses, liverworts, and hornworts. So we kind of went out of order on that again. So we're going then to the structure of the moss plant. So when they reproduce, when mosses reproduce, they produce these long stalks like this, long stalks that contain a capsule right here. And this is in the sporophyte phase. And the rhizoids are these long fins right down here. And I'm hiding some of them. They're not true roots, but they anchor them into the ground and they absorb water and minerals from the surrounding soils. And because of the fact that mosses only have these cell-to-cell passage of water, they don't have the vascular that is able to wick the water up. They can only pass water cell to cell. They really dry out quickly. And so that's why they can dry out fast and they really need a lot of water to keep the water wicking through them. So the water moves from cell to cell through the rhizoids right here into the rest of the plant. So you really have to keep them moist to keep them healthy and um, alive. So uses of mosses. Sphagnum mosses thrive in acidic bogs. And sphagnum is, I don't know if you do a lot of reading, but I love to read, but you always think of Ireland as a place where you read of the bogs, of the peat moss and people working the bogs there. So sphagnum mosses thrive in the bogs in Ireland. And you can then dry the sphagnum and it acts as a natural sponge and it can accumulate in the form of peat deposits. Peat then can be cut from the ground and used as a fuel. You could burn it and create heat. And peat can also be used to improve the soil's ability to retain water and increase soil acidity. It's even been used in housing. So now we're moving on to the seedless vascular plants. Probably name this one. Now we're moving on to the vascular tissue that ferns have. They have things called tracheids, and I put the pronunciation. It's a little tricky for some people to pronounce, so that's why I put it on there. Tracheids, like your trachea, tracheids, windpipe. So they have this vascular tissue, tracheids, that make up the xylem. It's pretty cool when you look at it at this level. But what they have right here is a step up in the development phase, the adaptation phase, or the tree of life phase, where they have been able to figure out how to have a process in which instead of passing water from cell to cell, they actually have this tissue now that wicks the water from the roots all the way to the tip in every part of the plant. So this is really a phase up and in the evolutionary development of the plant of going from just passing this water from cell to cell that the moss has to being able to wick it from all the way down at the roots all the way up to the top. So this is really cool. Tracheids right here. See that? Make up the xylem. And the xylem, you want to write this down, is the transport subsystem that carries the water from the roots to every part of the system. So you kind of want to remember that xylem goes up. Xylem goes up. So put your thumb up and remember xylem goes up. Because we're going to look at another vascular tissue, and that's the phloem. And the phloem usually goes from all of the leaves and goes down and everywhere. So the xylem goes up and the phloem goes down. Xylem goes up and the phloem goes down. So on this picture, I purposely did not write in the xylem and the phloem because I wanted you to think about it. So the phloem is the secondary transport subsystem that transports solutions of nutrients and carbohydrates produced in photosynthesis. So that's all of the sugar and all of those nutrients that are being made in the leaves, in those little chloroplasts that we've learned about, all of those things that are being made in those leaves, and it's then transporting it to the rest of the plant. So up in the leaves, down to everywhere else. That's what the phloem is doing. Flow down. So if I were to look at these blue arrows, what would you say that is representing? What tissue is that representing? Is that representing the phloem or the xylem? That's what you're supposed to be thinking about. Is it the xylem or the phloem? The blue. The blue would be the xylem because it's going up. The xylem goes up. And so the green would be the what? What would it be? It would be the phloem. Yes, because it's going from the leaves all the way down. All right, so now we're on to ferns and their relatives, and there are different kinds of seedless vascular plants. The first being club mosses, horsetails, and ferns. The ferns are, of course, the most numerous, and you'll see that every time you go out on a hike. You'll see lots and lots of ferns, although you'll see a lot of horsetails too. And I thought this was interesting. I didn't know this until I read it in our textbook, but you'll notice that in there it says that they're known as scouring rushes, and they were used in colonial times to scrub pots because they actually have the abrasive silica in them. I just knew them as a kid to feed my chickens. I had to take care of our chickens growing up, and I know that chickens love horsetails, but little did I know that they could be used to scour your pots and pans as well. So you learn something new every day, so now you know. Anyways, we're going to be focusing on ferns as we go along. So looking at the life cycle of ferns, ferns and their relatives have true roots now. They don't have the rhizoids that we saw before. They actually have true roots that draw up the water. They have leaves, and then they have stems. Ferns have vascular tissues, strong roots underground, and the stems are called rhizomes. Right here you see the rhizomes. And then the leaves are called the fronds, right here. Ferns and other vascular plants have a life cycle in which they have a diploid sporophyte, and that's the dominant stage. Those fronds that you see, those are what you see in the diploid sporophyte dominant stage, and we're going to see that in the life cycle as we go in depth. So the fern sporophyte develops haploid spores, that's the N, on the underside of the fronds right here. Anytime you're going out on a walk, if you flip over, and I'm sure you have, the fronds of a fern, you'll see structures. A lot of times you'll just think that that's a spore, but that's actually a structure called a sporangia. And the sporangia are grouped into clusters called sori. So you'll see a little bit more in depth right here going closer. These are clusters of sori, and in that, the sori actually, you can see even closer, there are spores. So there's the clusters of sporangia, even closer are these little tinier sori, and then in there are lots and lots of spores. So there you go. There's the closer of the sori, and then the individual is the sorus. So here's the sporangia right here. Isn't that amazing? In depth. Because they just look like spots to our naked eye, but looking closer you could see all of the individual sorus. All right, so this is looking in depth at the alteration of generation that you see in the life cycle of the ferns. You see over here, you have the diploid, and then over here you have the haploid. You have the sporangium over here in the diploid, and then you have the gametophyte generation over here. So over here, you're going to see that the sporophyte is what we see, and that's the fern frond. So the mature sporophyte is what you see. That creates the sporangium, that's that on the underside that we see, and then it releases these tiny little spores. These spores then go off into the ground and create this tiny little heart-shaped gametophyte. And we rarely see those with a naked eye. They're so small. They're about 1 centimeter or less, and they're really hidden into the ground. And they rely on the dampness of water to actually allow for the sperm to swim through water to make it to the egg. So in different cells on this gametophyte, you'll have egg cells and sperm cells, and the sperm cells will actually have to swim through water in order to reach the eggs. And then the young sporophyte will then grow up from this fertilized egg into a sporophyte. And then that sporophyte is what you see. The mature sporophyte is the fern frond. And you get the cycle starting over again. Okay, now we're going to talk about the fern gametophyte. Here's a close-up of it. And I'm going to get ready. We're getting ready for Valentine's Day. And so I'm going to draw this heart. Oh, that's kind of sad. Let's try to go with a red heart, shall we? Let me erase this and get ready with a red heart, shall we? A red heart for the gametophyte that we're going to do. So as you can see, this gametophyte is red and it's heart-shaped. Actually, it's green in real life, but you get the gist. So this gametophyte actually really depends on water. Why? Because it has some sperm cells and it has some egg cells, and in order for the sperm to get to the eggs, you have to have water. So these sperm have to swim through water in order to get to the eggs, and that makes us very happy because, look, that makes us smile. In order to have that water, then the eggs are successfully fertilized, and from that then you have a young sporophyte grow up, and that sporophyte grows up into something that we see, which is the mature fern frond that we see. So anyways, right back here is the measuring stick that you can't see, but it's actually 1 millimeter. So as you can see, this gametophyte is really tiny. So that's why we really rarely see it. If you're out in the woods and you see the ferns, you're going to see the sporophytes, but you're not going to see the gametophytes that are down in the ground that are growing these things. They're tiny. So good luck ever finding one. It would be awesome. But this is the fern gametophyte. Really cool. We're moving on to seed plants, and I think that's on page 5 of your notes. So we're over halfway there. So seed plants are even more things that you recognize. So seed plants are the most dominant group of photosynthetic organisms on land. And they're divided into 2 groups, and you probably already know this, 2 groups. There's gymnosperms, and then those are the ones that bear seeds directly into the surface of cones. And then there's angiosperms. Those are the flowering plants. They bear seeds within a layer of tissue that protects the seeds. So you can write that down onto that piece of paper. Gymnosperms are cone-bearing plants, and angiosperms are flowering plants, and their seeds are within a tissue that protects the seed. So the seed plants have a life cycle that alternates again between the gametophyte and the sporophyte stage, just like we saw in the ferns, just like we saw in other things as well. But they don't need water for reproduction like the fern did. So what does that mean? If these don't need water, what would that mean? That means that flowering plants can live just about anywhere. If you don't need water to reproduce, man, these things can live just about anywhere. You want to write that down. Flowering plants can live just about anywhere. So adaptations that allow seed plants to reproduce without water include flowers or cones, the transfer of sperm by pollination. No longer do they need water. This is another adaptation that's further along in this tree of life. We've gone from non-vascular to vascular plants. Now we have that they needed water for pollination. Now they don't need water, or they don't need water for pollination. And now they have a protection of the embryos in seeds. So cones and flowers. Gametophytes grow within sporophytes called cones, which are the seed-bearing structures of gymnosperms, and flowers, which are the seed-bearing structures of angiosperms. And you can write that all down and go on to page 6 of your notes to see how fast we're whipping through it now. All right, we're talking about reproduction free from water still, and we're talking about pollen. So right here, this is a picture of a micron electroscope right here of pollen, and you can see how it's so sticky. You understand that because when you touch onto pollen, it sticks to you, and it sticks to your clothes, sticks to the animals, and that's the purpose. It's supposed to be sticky because you need it to move from this part of the flower to get to the female part of the flower, the male part of the flower to the female part. So the male gametophyte is contained in a tiny structure called a pollen grain. That's the male gametophyte right there. Male gametophyte is the pollen grain. Now the sperm do not need water to fertilize eggs like we saw in the fern, in the gametophyte there. This is different. Instead, the pollen grain is carried by 3 different ways. It's either wind, or by an insect or a small animal. And then this transfer of pollen is called, right here, this arrow right here, this transfer of pollen from the male to the female structure of the flower is called pollination. So now we're on to seeds. The seed is actually the plant's embryo. And it's encased in a protective covering. Right here, the seed coat is a protective covering, and then all in here is the food supply for this tiny little embryo, this baby plant. You can actually take a bean seed and put them on a wet, damp cloth for a few hours and then split it apart, and you'll see this little embryo and then the food storage and then the seed coat inside it. An embryo is an organism in its early stage of development. So this is the plant, the embryo, baby plant. And then the seed coat surrounds and protects the embryo and keeps the contents of the seed from drying out. So this is the longitudinal section of the seed right here of a pine tree. So this is the wing to help it fly through the air and find a good place apart from the original tree, and allows it to separate from the tree to find a new place to plant. And then the pine tree seed, this is kind of the scale of it. And then this is the longitudinal open section. So this is how the embryo is for it. Instead of being off to the side, it's in the center. And then this is the stored food supply and the seed coat in a pine tree seed. So we're going to talk a bit about the cone bearer plants, the gymnosperms, and there are 4 different groups of gymnosperms. The first being the neophytes, the second being the cycads, the third being the ginkgos, and the fourth being the conifers. We're going to quickly go into each of those now. So get ready. This is on the 6th page of your notes. Cycads are the palm-like plants that reproduce with large cones, and they grow naturally in tropical and subtropical places. And then you have the ginkgos. These used to be really abundant, but actually they've gone almost extinct except for one species. There's one species left, and you'll hear about it in health food stores. I think it's known for its energy-giving properties, the ginkgo biloba, and you can get it in powder form, but it actually is like it looks like it's fossil ancestors, and it's actually planted in a lot of urban centers now because it's great at combating pollution and it can handle pollution. So people love to plant it in urban centers. So yeah, we love our ginkgo biloba. So keep planting it. So you can see the fossil of it right here and how it still closely resembles our version of it today. And here's a full-grown plant of the ginkgo biloba. All right, so the fourth and last of the gymnosperms, the cone bearers, is the conifers. And this is the most common of the 4 groups. There are over 500 known species, unlike the ginkgos where there's only 1. This has over 500 species. And those are the pines and the cedars that we have in our backyards. There's sequoias, and there's even the bristlecone pines that are some of the oldest that we know of. They have about 4,000 years old bristlecone pines. And then we have some of my favorites, which are the redwoods, which I grew up in. I had one in my backyard that was burned out back in the day to create an animal pen, and it was at least 12 feet wide, and we put a platform on top and a ladder going up to the top to create a tree fort. So redwoods are some of my favorite. But anyways, cone-bearing conifers, lots of different varieties, and some of our favorites because they're in our backyard. All right, so these are the female cones versus the male cones. I don't know if you've ever realized that there is a difference between them. Look at how much more feminine they look. They're pretty and white, and then the male cones are just brown and flaky, I guess, but no, there is a difference between the female cones on a tree and a male cone on a tree. And then we are on to, and you'll see in your notes too, there's some a little bit different pictures of some more cones for you, and that you probably have some in your yard as well. So we're on to flower plants. So we're on to the angiosperms. Once again, angiosperms are flowering plants, and that's where the reproductive parts are of the plant is in the flower. So with flowering plants, the flowers contain ovaries, which then surround and protect the seed. And then after pollination, that ovary then develops into the fruit. And the fruit is the wall of tissue that then surrounds that seed. And the fruit actually is protecting the seed. In all costs, it's protecting the seed. And then it aids in its dispersal. If you ever thought about it, the fruit then makes it so that an animal will want to eat it and then disperse its seed somewhere else and spread the seed somewhere else. I remember growing up and finding bear piles, and my grandpa would teach me what the animal had eaten, so I could tell what the bear had eaten. And sure enough, I knew if the bear had eaten through all the plums or through the berries or through the cherries, and that fruit had done its job. It had protected the seed, but it had also aided in the dispersal of that fruit, because now that fruit had gotten fertilized and planted into the ground. So the fruit had done its job and aided in the dispersal of that new plant. All right, we're on to the flower anatomy of the flower. This is basically kind of like a lily, and I'm going to show you the different parts of the flower. First, we're going to go to the male part. The anther is the tip of the male part. Coming down, the filament is the long part that attaches down to the base of the flower. Those are the two male parts of the flower. And then you've got the female parts. I'm going to do that in orange. That's the stigma at the top. That's sticky. That's supposed to attract the pollen, so it'll be usually a sticky part. And then you've got the style, and then you have the ovary and the ovule. Those are the four parts of the female part of the, right here, this is all the female part of the plant. And in order to make your flower last longer, I don't know if you may know this, this is where all the pollen is, and a lot of times on the flower it'll have all of that really dark pollen that'll get all over your counter or anything. But if you break those off, the anthers off, you can actually keep your flower lasting longer, because remember, the whole part of the flower is to be pollinated. So break off those anthers and it'll keep your flower lasting longer. Okay, so with the diversity of angiosperms, they can be categorized in three main ways. The first being whether it's a monocot or a dicot. And we're going to go into that in a little bit further detail. In basically 2 slides, we're going to have a graph to help you see whether it's a monocot or a dicot. Also, whether it can be categorized, whether it's woody or herbaceous, and woody meaning like just what you would think it is. Is it wood or is it not? If a stalk looks like wood, what you would consider wood or not, that's how you would decipher or categorize an angiosperm. Or if it's an annual, biennial, or perennial, we'll go over what those mean in just a minute. And then an angiosperm can be broken into a few of those. If it's a dicot and it's an annual, so it can be in multiple categories as well. All right, so with the diversity of angiosperms, we've got monocots and dicots, and they're being named for the number of seedlings or cotyledons that emerge from the plant embryo. So that's basically as a seed right here is emerging from the ground, right here it's emerging from the ground, here it is, you're going to get these little first seed leaves coming up and from this little plant embryo. And you're either going to get 2 or 1 right here. So monocots, mono meaning 1, have 1 seed leaf. And a dicot, di meaning 2, are going to have 2 leaves. So how many leaves does this one have? This one has 1 or 2? 2. It has 2 seed leaves emerging from the embryo, and so this one's going to be a dicot. This one's emerging, it has 1 leaf emerging. So is that going to be a monocot or a dicot? Yeah, it's going to be a monocot. Great job. And then the cotyledon is the first leaf. Sorry, a cotyledon. A cotyledon is the first leaf or a pair of leaves produced by the embryo of a seed plant. So monocots versus dicots. I know my kids have had to do this through the years and then they forget year to year, so you're going to learn it again. Monocots versus dicots. So first, like I said before, the single cotyledon versus 2 cotyledons. When you break apart the seed, a lot of seeds will break in half. That means it's got 2 halves, it's got 2 cotyledons. And then some of them won't, they're just one single like kernel, and that's a monocot. An example of that would be like a corn kernel. And then a dicot, you've seen this like on a bean. A bean can kind of split apart. That's a dicot. And you'll see on like grass or on a corn stalk, there are these parallel veins that go up. That shows it's a monocot. But plants with these branched veins like this, that shows there's a dicot. Now flowers with parts with multiples of 3 leaves, this one has 6, so that's going to be a monocot. But florals with multiples of 4 or 5, that's going to be a dicot. Monocots, if you cut the stem like this, there's going to be vascular bundles all throughout. But dicots are going to have this perfect little arranged pattern around in a circle. The root systems of monocots, there's going to be this fibrous root pattern in the monocots. But in the dicots, there's going to be what's known as a tap root, where right down here, there's going to be just more of these little roots coming off right here, and one long root. This right here is the main tap root. Diversity of angiosperms. Now, this would be woody. It's wood. Or herbaceous. It's an herb. It's got flowers. So the tree may have flowers too, but it's a thicker stem. It's woody. Woody plants include trees and shrubs and vines. And the plant stems, they've got thinner and smooth and non-woody characteristics. So then you've got annuals, biennials, and perennials. We're on the final stretch, everyone. We've made it to 40 minutes and we are on the last part. So great job. And my throat is going out because it's late and it's 10 o'clock here at night. I'm ready for bed. How about you? A little tidbit about myself that when storms come in and the pressure drops, I have migraines. I'm like a barometer. So if we didn't have the weather man, I would know when a storm is coming just from my headaches. So awesome. Anyways, annuals, biennials, and perennials. There are three types of category plant lifespans: annuals, biennials, and perennials. And the plant lifespan is determined just by genetic or environmental factors. So the first one is annuals, just like annual, like every year. Annuals are plants that complete a life cycle in one growing season. So you have to plant those every year. So when you're going to the nursery and it says an annual, be aware they're not going to reseed themselves necessarily. You have to plant them every year. Biennials, they have a 2-year life cycle, though with pansies, just be aware those things spread like no other. So in the first year, they germinate and grow roots, short stems, and sometimes leaves. And in the second year, they grow new stems and leaves and produce flowers and seeds and die, unless they're pansies, and then they spread. And I don't know why they call them biennials, because those are like weeds. So be careful what biennials are. And perennials, they live for more than 2 years. Those are your trees, unless you're Jamie and Mrs. Pennington, who can kill almost anything. But anyways, perennials should live, depending on if you have a green thumb or a black thumb. Perennials should live more than 2 years. And those are the trees that live long and healthy lives. And even plants can be perennials. And you can go to your nursery next time when you go, and you can check out the little, at Home Depot in the plant section, they'll say annual, or they'll say biennial, or they'll say perennial. And you'll say, I know what those mean. Anyways, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and that you stick to your worksheets this week so we can have the same amount of luck of studying for the same things, so that I can make up a test that's going to be keeping you on board. You guys did well on your other test, and I will be grading that tomorrow. And I will be available for questions during class time. I will set up a Skype session, and hopefully you will understand this, and I will get it up for you tomorrow morning. Have a great week. Have fun learning about plants. Maybe dig some out and look at the ones that are doing well in the snow. And I know I had some snow whites popping up right before all the snow covered them up, so I'll have to go dig them out and see how they're doing out there in my yard. Anyways, have a great week, and I will talk to you guys soon. I miss you guys. Have a wonderful time. Bye.